First of all, I am very grateful for this invitation, even if I don't think to be an over-expert in the links between religions and politics and the post-war Europe. But anyway, I spent a lot of my life working in this field, and I had the fortune also to meet many, not of the European, of the first generations, but of the European of the second generation, like Delors and Kohl, who died last week, and with whom I had the fortune to work for years and years, and to talk with them, to talk deeply with them also about the values, the moral values and the religious values that are under the European project. But now let us go in order. The Emperor Melloni asked me to answer to 3 questions, and I am, obedient. I was accustomed to be obedient in my life. So asking, how was Europe during the Cold War, and the beginning of Europe? Look, when I read the notes of the European founders, it was really a really different Europe. They say it was a really post-war Europe. The problem of peace was a real obsession, correctly an obsession for the founders of Europe, They didn't care about the economic problems, they didn't care in the beginning, the attention was only on peace. We have to end this. And it was really an incredible historical situation in which you had 3 people, De Gasperi, Adenauer, and Schuman, with an incredible, I repeat, similar ideological religious foundation. Not only that, they, all 3, were speaking German. And so, in the notes of the beginning of Europe, you don't have chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, article 1, but simply, look, the conversation is, we were under a window and we were talking on what we could do for preserving peace, for making a friendship between France and Germany, all with a deep religious foundation. Well, Schuman was Schuman was a man of religion, even in his whole life. But De Gasperi and Adenauer, both of them were also very, let's say, shaped in the religious value. And so the problem of fraternity, the problem of end of the Cold War, they were absolutely dominant. You don't find in any page of their notes some priority for economic problems. Well, I do remember that in a De Gasperi note, he make a clear confusion between millions and billions, So you clearly understand that this was not his you understand that he was not a thief. He was honest, because he had no idea of this. But the problem was, look, we had centuries of war, we must build peace. And when the European Army project was vetoed by the French Assembly, only After that, they started to talk about economic problems, and because the political union was impossible in that moment, let's say, Monnet suggested the idea, let us start from the economy. Let us start from steel and coal community. Let us start with Euratom. Let us start with that. But the previous idea was completely, let's say, independent from any economic project. Clearly, we have a second characteristic of that time: necessity of unity and the real daily fear of the Soviet domination. It was nothing similar of Russia today, nothing similar to any problem. This was the idea that the borders were not yet settled, and so the danger of some blow-up was a daily preoccupation, you know. So security and so this is the reason also why, because the failure of the European army, the NATO became step by step a priority. You know, that was not a European project, of course. It was different, but it could bring the same message of defense, of security, and in that time of peace, protected peace. And so we have this new event that that were posed the foundation of a half-century Europe, that from one side, security was under the American protection, and from the other side, economic, it was a project that was developing inside Europe, you know. Then when we should talk about today, we have to analyze whether Trump breaks this long-term, let's say, silent agreement, you know, or not, because it's a real change. It's not only, it's something more, it's something deeper than the normal change of American president. For us, is maybe a complete third of history, but this we shall analyze later. But in that Europe of that time, clearly, because of the war, socially was a time of diffuse poverty, clearly, but also a time of reconstruction with in the Northern European countries, especially in Germany, a total a period of incredible biblical migration. The resettlement of Europe obliged millions of people to come to the new Germany, to the settlement from Poland for all the area, all the North European areas. And it was clearly, this was an example of an enormous solidarity. If we compare how this problem was tackled in that time with a common political response and how the problem is tackled today, there is a completely enormous difference. Clearly, there is also a difference of the type of migration, because in that time was more homogeneous from any point of view, historical, cultural, so on, and now is different. But you had societies not only ready to prepare a common European policy, but also to accept, receive, and merge with the consequence brought by the Second World War. This was the Europe. This was the Europe of that time. Second question is, one generation after that, Delors and Kohl lived in the diversity between the Soviet world and the liberal democratic world. This second phase was clearly different from the first one. There was not anymore, let's say, some sort of accepted and natural Catholic domination, let's say, a group of Catholic leaders. The society was much more complex, and Europe was going out of the dramatic post-war period and building step by step a real new economic strength. Indiscussed, the European values were accepted by almost the totality of European people at that time, even in Europe, in the 6-country Europe, but then even in 9 and 12 countries Europe, and 15 countries Europe, there was a clear idea of a correlation between European project growth, prosperity, employment. So there was some sort of instinctive positive valuation of Europe. Of course, this does not mean I am not painting a golden age. I don't mean absolutely that there were no national fightings. We had period of real tensions between France and Germany, among all the European countries, different interests. I could mention when Charles de Gaulle decided to abandon even the meetings of the European Union in Brussels, the so-called period of the empty chair, in which France was out of the institution, and you had many tensions, all in the not discussing the European project, especially the European common market, but of course trying to reinforce with the idea that Europe was unavoidable and all the future project to reinforce the national role of the future Europe. So from the economic point of view, you have the so-called period of the flag companies, let's say the merging of all the national industrial or, let's say, service companies in order to make France stronger or Germany stronger or Italy stronger in the future European reality, you know. So it was a very mixed period in which from one side you had a national pride waking up, from the other side everybody was convinced that the expression of the national interest and also of the national pride was under the condition of arriving to a European project. The only country outside with a different idea of the long-term project was UK in that time, was UK, and you understand from a lot of let's say, documents, of a lot of historical memory, why we arrived to Brexit, because don't forget that UK started to shape an alternative market union, an alternative free trade area called EFTA with the Scandinavian country, and only after the failure of this project, they decided in 1974, so very early, already 44 years before the Brexit, they decided to enter into the Union. But always with a different priority. Let's say the long-term view was not to accept 100% the idea of Europe, but to keep still a long-term choice between United States and Europe. So the present interest was pushing UK in the direction of the common market and then the European Union. But the long-term destiny was still under dispute inside the country. But in all other European members of the Union, there was no doubt in that term, in that period of time, in the second generation, that the destiny was Europe. And you had really still peace as goal, but the instrument was the economy. It was absolutely shifted. Clearly, the statesmen, the forward-looking statement, they were still linking the two goals, I do remember the long conversation with Helmut Kohl when, as an economist, I was raising the problem of how to protect the euro from possible risks and how to have also an economic unity, not only a monetary unity in the same time, And the answer was quite interesting, because he was telling me, I want the euro because my brother died during the war. He didn't tell me because of economy. It was incredible answer. I want the euro because my brother died during the war. So you remember from that, you have still a generation of politicians who have used economic instruments, understand that the new glue of Europe is economy, but that the long-term view is still peace and cooperation, And of course, he added the other statement, Romano, you are an Italian, and you cannot forget that Rome was not done in one day. And so we have to be patient. We shall do also the necessary economic steps day by day. But this is our destiny, and I have no doubt about that, So it was a great period for Europe, and the influence of Delors on the Commission was important because till 2005, till the end of my Commission, the European Commission was really the symbol of a supranational Europe, and Delors was clearly deeply influenced by the social goals of Europe, of course, economic instruments, but also a deep understanding of the necessity of a social Europe and a deep faith that the progress of Europe was unavoidable. You still, with Delors, you have a lot of obstacles. He was fighting day-by-day battles and so on and so on. But he was broadly helped by great European leaders like Mitterrand, like Kohl. So the atmosphere was still of an undisputed project. The problem started clearly when Europe enlarged, and I take my responsibility for the project, and I still think that it was absolutely necessary, even if difficult, even with consequence, not always positive, but absolutely necessary, because otherwise we should have entered in a terrible period of tensions. Two reasons, of the unavoidable enlargement. First of all, history comes, the train of history comes only once, and you have to take it. Second, think what could be Poland today in the Ukrainian situation. We have to think about that, in an undefined situation. Of course, I was completely aware that it was a delicate passage, and because in the long years of negotiation for enlargement, the counterparts, the governments of the new countries, Baltic countries, Poland, Hungary, Czech Republic, Slovakia, and then Slovenia, they were primarily asking for NATO membership, and only in the second rank Europe. And it was for me impossible to explain and to convince them that being member of Europe was the same thing that in terms of security was equal to be protected by NATO, because the European solidarity was so strong that should have protected them in any case. It was really impossible, because the problem of the Soviet domination, the terrible period of, anti-democratic rules, it was so strong, so vivid, that really NATO first, Europe second. But clearly, in any case, you couldn't leave them in the limbo. And in spite of the increasing difference in the structure of society, in the experience of democracy, it was necessary to end a period of uncertainty in Europe. And in spite of the tension that we have now, especially in Poland, in Hungary, in the Baltic states, we are able to preserve peace and even solidarity, because these countries now have an anti-European attitude, but they are so happy to receive European money in order to speed up the development of the country. So we are completely out of the British case because they have no alternative. They try to monetize some sort of national political interest, but they understand that the long-run destiny is with Europe. In any case, is with you. So I don't think that in this third European generation there will be the danger of any other exit or split, or, we shall live with a lot of differentiation, with a lot of tensions, with a lot of, but we entered, I think, this is not part of your question, but I have to update. You are an old man, and so I have to update your questions, And I think we entered. Yes.
The emperor, Romano Prodi.
Yeah. You are the emperor. We are entering in a new phase now. I am not exaggerating. Because of Brexit and because of Trump, Europe is coming back. So I think that it will be dramatic to build a Trump monument in front of the European Parliament. But maybe this will be the case, this will be the case in the future. Why? Because I told you that Europe was born under the military umbrella of the United States. United States were also always backing Europe, but till the end of last century. Then the European competition in the economic field was in some way changing this type of solidarity. I sum up briefly with this statement, that the American governments, from Clinton to Bush to Obama, they were happy to see Europe swimming. But they were also happy that Europe could drink a bit of water when swimming, That's, the competition could not be so strong. And during the economic crisis, clearly the economic crisis was opened by American mistakes, but it was reversed on Europe because of our mistake, because of our split, but also because of a clear American friendship, but with some hesitated friendship, let's say, friendship, but now it's different. Now it's different. We have America, at least in the declaration, but I am not sure that Trump will be consistent, because he has never been consistent in any statement. But it was much more, it was changing his mind vis-à-vis China, but not vis-à-vis Europe. It's already 5 months. You had the first phase with China, in which, that Trump has made his campaign against China and Mexico, but against China especially. Then he started, let's say, increasing tension with China, receiving the Japanese Prime Minister, then declaring, and this is a real mortal sin, that there are two Chinas. This made the Chinese furious, and after that, he has to declare that there is only one China. I was wrong, sorry, it was a mistake. But with Europe, it's not the same thing. He received the Brexit Prime Minister, then insulted Germany heavily, insulted us, other European countries, telling you are slave of Germany. He met Mrs. Merkel and he didn't shake the hand of the lady. And so it's incredible, this type of behavior, completely split from the behavior of his collaborators, who still say, look, no, we are friends, and so on and so on. So it was why I was joking, but not joking, telling that we should build a monument for the unified of Europe to Trump, because Mrs. Merkel reacted proposing the multi-speed Europe. What is multi-speed Europe? You know that in the second phase of Europe, it was impossible to find unanimity because of the initial interest and so on. And we Italians, myself personally, we proposed, look, if we cannot have unanimity, let us use common sense. We make progress in many fields, as many countries as we can. Of course, we must have a sufficient number of countries, you know, but we cannot stay idle, you know, and without any sense of progress. And Angela Merkel, because of Trump and because of Putin, she thought, look, let us go to the Europe, multi-speed Europe, or let's say different layers Europe, you can call it as you can. And this could be only a declaration, but after the French elections could be a reality, a new phase for Europe. I put the conditional could, because you never know. You know, it's too, the French presidency is too fresh, and they already had some resignation in the first week, you know, so you see how, but we never had in France, not even with Mitterrand, such a pro-European campaign that Macron did. It's incredible, really, I have never seen that. And the man winning the election and going in front of his people from the square of the museum with the song of Europe, you know, with Beethoven and not with the Marseillaise, is incredible. It's absolutely incredible. Then clearly we shall see whether, but now you have the possibility of having a new solidarity that it's comprehensive only of, well, not total Europe, but not in aggression or competition with the other members of the Union. Simply, look, we do something more, but the door is always open, because the condition of a multi-speed Europe is that any project must be open to all other countries. So we have this project that can take speed again, take, strength again. Of course, is not totally given for granted because you must find the fields in which you aggregate the will of many countries. But the clear, most delicate point of union in the beginning, as I hinted before, it was the defense. And if there is a field in which now the defense, common defense is possible, is this common defense is possible. Let's say, why? Because France is the only country with nuclear armament, and even more important, is the only country with a veto right inside the United Nations. If Macron is so intelligent to understand that not giving up to this prerogative, because they will always remain French prerogative, but if he agrees to discuss these prerogatives with the other countries and in some way to put at the service of all Europe, you will see France increasing and, going back to some sort of new cooperation among the big European countries, because Germany has all the interest to do that for the reason I mentioned before. Italy, of course, Spain, of course. Clearly, we shall not have in the first stage Poland or maybe some Baltic states, but history will change, and we really could have a new phase of this difficult part of Europe. But why, and I end this long answer, why is so difficult, the European progress? For a very simple reason, that it is based on democracy and not on force. You shape very quickly things with the army, but then they go back, they return to the first stage. If you do it through democracy with this slow, difficult process, then you build a stable Europe. But now, and this is the last question of my boss, how is Europe vis-à-vis Mediterranean, Africa, Russia, and China? Look, it's clearly losing ground because of the splits of the division of the last period. We are not protagonists of the world history in any field, and we are not at the same level of Russia, China, and the United States. I have been teaching in China for, well, till 2 years, for 7 years, 6 years. And in the first years, my students of the Business School of Shanghai, they were all asking me seminars about Europe. This project was fascinating the world. In the last year, nobody did. No interest about it. It was a lost game. And clearly Brexit, now it's in the seminar later after my end of my teaching, is even more evident, Why? Brexit is a serious, well, from one side, it is helping some European unity decision. But for the idea of Europe is a serious loss for a simple reason that many countries in the world, India, Australia, Canada, the English-speaking Africa, the Commonwealth area, they were looking at Europe with the British glasses. And now the British glasses are not anymore available, And so the idea of losing Europe, you know, it's and even from, let's say, from the Chinese point of view, Europe is disappointing. I do remember, because I was the negotiator, the counterpart with the Chinese president in the time of the euro, you know, and it was a fantastic experience, because year by year they were fascinating of the idea of the euro. And the first year they asked me, really, the European currency will disappear, then you will have a paper, a common paper, a note. Yes. And then the last year, can we take the euro as a reserve for China? I said yes. And the answer was not an economic answer. It was, look, if there is the euro side by side with the dollar, there will be room also for the Chinese renminbi. And so I shall buy as many euros, as many dollars in my reserve. And he did it till the crisis. But when Europe reacted in such a negative way of splitting last year, they stopped it. They still have a sensible reserve in Europe, but not as it was before, because in this crisis you don't see anymore the euro in the same condition with the dollar, because from the economic point of view, we are stronger than the United States. European industrial production and export are bigger, if you take all EU before Brexit, you know, they are bigger than US. And, you know, this is why Europe, in the world, we had the bad nickname of an economic giant, a political dwarf, and a military worm, you know, and we have all this situation. So the problem of how to shape Europe vis-à-vis the new power is a simple problem of unity. It's not a problem of potential strength. Now we are not united in this field. The new window is open. This is why I consider it so important. I don't know if this will be only a window of also a door in which we can transit. But we have this new perspective. But clearly, this needs a completely change of spirit inside Europe. We have to go back to the first spiritual union of Europe, you know. And for example, you asked me about Africa. We help Africa, but there is no European policy vis-à-vis Africa. It's a disaster. When there was the enlargement, and when I was traveling through Egypt, Libya, Syria, the common opinion was, look, you are our friend, you know everything about us, not the Americans, but this is parenthesis. You know everything about us, but you don't exist. You only look at North, you only look at the enlargement. And my answer was, clearly there was an historical emergency, but I shall do all my best in order to change the attention. But since that, we never had any African policy. But last week, for the first time, the German Chancellor was hinting to a common European project vis-à-vis Africa. And this was the main content of the meeting with the Pope. Incredibly new, also that, you know. So we have this new feeling that history is important. you know, and I do hope that, because you unite Europe only if you have a common policy for immigration, a common policy for Africa, a common policy for the, otherwise you don't unite Europe, you know. And this, I want to be, I don't say optimist, but much more hopeful than I was a few months ago, because I do see this change in the world, you know. And also, and I end with this, you know, it's incredible, with a strong united policy, you see a country like Russia that is terribly weak, that is so powerful in the world politics. Because, you know, Russia, compared to Europe, from the economic point of view, it's nothing. 145 million people, but with very few spots of contemporary economy, but a lot of problems, you know, a fantastic set of natural resources, but with and is really giving the cards in the Middle East policy. And you know, this is incredible, because trade with Middle East is Europe, is not Russia. Cultural heritage is Europe. You know, I do remember when I was to the funeral of Assad, the father of Assad. I was with the French President Chirac, and really all the country was worshipping France. Really, every minister was going to confess himself vis-à-vis Chirac, you know. And we abandoned that because of our divisions, because of our political stupidity. Because we have to understand that divided, we are nothing, nothing. I repeat always when I speak about that, and excuse somebody that have already listened to me, we say Prodi will repeat himself, but I have in my mind a precise historical comparison. If you look to the Renaissance Italy, the Italian states, they were really leading in the world, you know. Venice, Genoa, Milan, you know, in any field, art, military, technology, optical science, philosophy, all that, you know. There was the first globalization, that was the discovery of America. It was a globalization. We have remained divided. No Italian state was able to build the new ships, the new caravels. If you go to the arsenal in Venice, you see that you cannot build big ships. And Italy disappeared from the world map for 4 centuries. We disappeared. Now, Germany, France, Italy, Spain, we are in the same situation that the Italian state, and there is the second definitive globalization. Which are the new caravels? It's very clear. Google, Apple, Alibaba, eBay, and there is no one, I repeat, no one European protagonist of the new globalization. And we have been proud, we Europeans, that we have found it, well, we obliged Ireland to pay tax, $13 billion tax to the Irish government. They will never pay. But in any case, we have been proud to have obliged them. Then I was looking to the Apple balance sheet. They have $258 billion cash outside United States. That's all. We are lost. if we don't stay together and we don't participate to the new world, to the new globalization. This is Europe vis-à-vis the others of the world, you know. Clearly, I was, because of my bad profession, I was moving from, let's say, spiritual goals to the economic, but this is the reality, you know. This is the new world. And it is important because if we don't do that, we disappear. And also our culture, our traditional welfare states, that the only thing, the only good heritage of Europe in the terrible past century was the welfare state. And nobody has a welfare state as we have, you know. And this is, we are devastating this. Of course, we have to correct. Now, I participate to a great project, I hope that will be, because we understood that in the European public opinion, Europe, the common idea that Europe is for bankers, even if it's not true. So there is a very interesting initiative of all the Caisse de dépôt et renseignement, or the big Cassa Depositi e Prestiti, the big public treasury bodies, that together the 20th countries are now thinking to build a project for social Europe. Education, health, and social housing only, to put side by side with all the economic project, to give the European the idea that solidarity is still on the foundation of Europe, you know. And we hope to convince all the country, because, and now is the moment to do that because of the political change that I hinted before.